The ocean doesn't forget what we throw away. Every piece of plastic that leaves a shoreline, a river, a storm drain, it ends up somewhere. And for decades, the Pacific Ocean has been collecting it. Not on the surface where you can easily see it. In the water column, on the seafloor, wrapped around coral, lodged inside the bodies of animals that never asked for any of this. By 2015, scientists estimated that more than 8 million metric tons of plastic were entering the ocean every year. That number was so large most people stopped feeling it. It became wallpaper. Just another catastrophe headline to scroll past. But something happened in the years that followed that almost nobody covered. A removal effort, real, measurable, unglamorous, pulled 45 million kilograms of plastic out of American coastal and ocean waters. Not a proposal. Not a goal. Done. Logged. Verified. And what came back after that removal is the part of the story that should have been front-page news. If what happened to those ecosystems gives you hope, stay with us. Because the data is undeniable, and the scientists who saw it weren't expecting what they found. The first thing you need to understand is how plastic actually behaves in the ocean. Most people picture the Great Pacific Garbage Patch and imagine a floating island you could walk across. That image is wrong, and the real picture is actually worse. The patch is not a solid mass. It is a soup, a diffuse swirling concentration of microplastics, ghost fishing gear, fragmented bottles, and broken down film that spreads across an area roughly twice the size of Texas. Most of it sits just below the surface, invisible from above, invisible from a boat, invisible to everything except the animals swimming through it. Ghost gear is the term researchers use for lost or abandoned fishing equipment, nets, lines, traps that keeps fishing after the fishermen have gone. A single abandoned net can drift for years, trapping fish, sea turtles, marine mammals, and seabirds in a cycle that has no end. In some surveyed areas of the North Pacific, ghost gear made up more than 40% of the large debris by weight. And underneath all of this, on the seafloor near high-traffic coastlines and river mouths, plastic accumulates the way sediment does. Slowly, steadily, in layers. That is the world the cleanup effort walked into. The effort was not one single program. It was a coordinated push across federal agencies, state governments, tribal nations, fishing communities, and private organizations that accelerated sharply after 2016. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration ran its Marine Debris Program. The Environmental Protection Agency funded coastal cleanup grants. Fishing fleets in Alaska, Hawaii, California, and the Pacific Northwest participated in programs that paid them to bring back what they hauled up. In the Hawaiian archipelago, teams specifically targeted the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, some of the most remote and ecologically critical reefs on the planet, removing hundreds of thousands of kilograms of derelict fishing gear in repeated expeditions, over more than a decade. When you add it up across all those programs, all those years, all those coastlines, the total crossed 45 million kilograms. That is roughly the weight of 6,000 full-grown elephants pulled out of American waters. But here is what no press release told you clearly enough. The removal was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a different one. Within 2 years of significant ghost gear removal in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, coral reef surveys started returning numbers that confused the research teams. Coral coverage in previously cleared zones was recovering faster than baseline models predicted. Fish biomass, the total weight of fish living in a given area, was increasing. Species that had been functionally absent from certain reef sections were showing up again in the count data. If a story like this gives you hope, comment the word hope so we know you're watching. The mechanism makes sense once you understand it. Coral reefs are not just pretty structures. They are the most productive ecosystems per square meter on the planet. They cover less than 1% of the ocean floor, but support roughly 25% of all marine species at some point in their life cycle. When ghost gear drags across a reef, it does not just scrape the surface. It breaks the calcium carbonate architecture that took decades to grow. It kills the coral polyps. It turns productive three-dimensional habitat into flat rubble. Remove the gear, and the reef still has to rebuild from the rubble up, but the rebuilding can start. Without the removal, the net keeps coming back. The damage compounds. What happened next surprised even the scientists. In several monitored sites around the main Hawaiian Islands, sea turtle populations began shifting their behavior. Hawaiian green sea turtles, a species that had been listed as threatened since 1978, began returning to foraging grounds they had largely abandoned in areas where debris density had been highest. Researchers tracking individual turtles with satellite tags recorded this over multiple seasons. The turtles were not randomly wandering back. They were selecting cleaned habitat over adjacent uncleaned habitat in measurable proportions. A turtle does not read a press release. It reads the water. And the water in those zones had changed. The story on the Alaskan coastline ran differently but pointed in the same direction. Alaska has the longest coastline of any state in the country, more than 33,000 miles if you trace every inlet and island. It also receives some of the heaviest debris loads in the United States because of North Pacific gyre circulation patterns that funnel marine debris from across the ocean onto its shores. Alaskan fishing communities had been living alongside this problem for generations. Starting around 2014 and accelerating through the following decade, a program called Fishing for Energy in partnership with NOAA and the Port Authority Network paid fishermen to bring abandoned nets and gear directly to ports for recycling or disposal instead of returning them to the water or leaving them on beaches. The cultural shift inside those communities was as significant as the tonnage numbers. Fishermen who had grown up treating old gear as someone else's problem began treating its recovery as part of the job. Some of the highest per-vessel removal rates in the entire national program came from small Alaskan fleets working remote areas that government vessels rarely reached. And on those cleaned beaches, Kodiak, the Aleutian Chain, the Gulf of Alaska coastline, something quiet and measurable happened. Stellar sea lion haul-out sites in debris-heavy zones had shown elevated rates of entanglement injury in annual surveys going back to the late 1990s. In areas where sustained beach and nearshore cleanup had taken place over multiple years, those injury rates dropped, not to zero, but down steadily in the data year after year. The data was undeniable. Here is the part of this story that rarely gets told clearly, and it matters for understanding what we are really talking about. 45 million kilograms sounds enormous. It is enormous. It represents thousands of work hours by fishermen, scientists, tribal members, and volunteers operating in some of the most difficult marine environments on Earth. It is a genuine, hard-won achievement that deserves to be recognized as exactly that. And it is also roughly 0.5% of the plastic that scientists estimate currently exists in the global ocean. That number is not here to flatten the hope. It is here to sharpen it, because the lesson of every reef survey, every sea turtle tracking study, every Alaskan haul-out assessment is not, we cleaned everything and the problem is solved. The lesson is something more durable than that. Localized removal, done consistently in the right places, produces real ecological recovery in measurable time frames. The ocean responds, the animals respond, the reef responds. The system has not forgotten how to work. It has been waiting for the pressure to ease. The northwestern Hawaiian Islands coral that regrew after gear removal did not wait for the whole Pacific to be clean. It responded to what changed in its immediate vicinity. The sea turtles that returned to foraging grounds did not wait for a global treaty. They responded to what they could detect in the water around them. That is the mechanism that makes this worth understanding. Nature does not need perfection. It needs relief. Sustained, targeted, unglamorous relief. The kind that does not photograph well and does not trend on social media but shows up in the count data 2 years later. The United States Coastal Cleanup Program that reached 45 million kilograms did not emerge from a single dramatic moment. It grew from decades of quieter work research vessels mapping debris fields, tribal councils organizing beach days, fishing associations negotiating gear return incentives, reef ecologists publishing survey data that almost no one outside their field read. The dramatic number at the end was built from thousands of unspectacular days. What came after it, the coral growth, the turtle return, the declining entanglement rates, is also not dramatic in the way that news cycles want. There was no single morning when a scientist looked at a reef and said, it's back. There were quarterly surveys, season over season, where the numbers moved in one direction consistently enough that the conclusion became unavoidable. The ocean began to answer. That answer is still incomplete. The debris still outnumbers the recovery by orders of magnitude. New plastic is still entering the water every day at rates that dwarf what any cleanup program removes. The problem has not been solved, and anyone telling you it has is not reading the same data the researchers are. But the story of what happened after 45 million kilograms came out of the water is not a story about a solved problem. It is a story about a system proving it can still respond. About a reef that was not as dead as it looked. About a sea turtle that remembered where the clean water was. About fishing communities in Alaska deciding that their coastline was worth fighting for, one net at a time. Those are not small things. In a world full of stories about what is being lost, those are stories about what holds. The ocean has not given up on us. The question is whether we will give it enough room to do what it already knows how to do. If you believe nature still has a chance, subscribe. Your support keeps these stories coming.